So this is Aaron Moore. He's our speaker tonight. He is now our commercial horticulture agent. Is that correct? Working with small farmers who grow for community service, community CSA,
CSAs,
farmers markets,
those sorts of things.
those types of things. So happy plants equal happy gardeners. Cucurbits are common in many of our gardens, so it's worth the time to learn more about this diverse group of plants. Aaron Moore is going to talk in depth about selecting and caring for cucurbits. You're going to see hands-on demonstrations caring for plants and walk away with transplants to grow in your own garden. Is that correct? Was there a crop failure there?
There's a little problem with transplant, but I do have a few giveaways.
Okay. So he's our agriculture, extension agent, horticulture, consumer versus I'm Debbie Dillion. I am he's commercial, I'm consumer. So I do master gardener. We offer these types of programs for homeowners. So he focuses on small farm production and management, including both fruit and vegetable production. And he's got a lot of hands-on experience growing. So he's got a lot of practical experience that he's going to bring to your talk tonight. So I will turn it over to Aaron. Thank you, Aaron.
All right, thank you, Debbie.
Do you want me to dim these first front lights or pictures will show it better?
Yeah, let's do for
Okay.
now, and then I might turn it back on.
Okay.
But yeah, hi everyone. So like Debbie said, I'm here in the county. I do basically the same job that Debbie does, but I do it with just the farming community. So I'm working with them on things like production, but on marketing, selling the vegetables. I do a lot of work in foods and things like that too. So with commercial horticulture, we work with cucurbits a little bit. I am not a cucurbit guru, but I'll certainly, my hope tonight is that if you're a really experienced gardener, then maybe you'll pick up a few things, right? If you're a very new and beginning gardener, my hope is that you walk away knowing a lot more about cucurbits than you did before. So that's sort of my expectation. I hope that checks the box for you guys. So before we get started with cucurbits, because cucurbits are a big group. They're a big group of plants. So before we get started, we're going to take a step back to our high school biology class for just a minute. I can see a lot of faces lighting up as I say that, right? So, but I think it's very important for us to go over binomial nomenclature of plants before we step into the cucurbits, and this might answer some of the questions that you have about them. So first, as we go through it, plants are classified scientifically with names. So our common names like crimson sweet watermelon, what crimson sweet is here may not be what crimson sweet watermelons are in Arkansas, somewhere like that. But the botanical name's always the same across the world, no matter where you go. So everything tonight that we're talking about is in the cucurbit family, the Cucurbitaceae. Then there's a step down from the family grouping to genus. The genus here, this is maple acer, and then you have the specific epithet, and that's your second word there. When you put those two together, that's the species. And a species is defined as individuals that can breed and they get viable offspring.
Yeah, and some people in remote land are having trouble hearing you, if you could speak up just a little bit.
Soft voice.
Yeah.
Come on, project like you're talking to your boys.
That's right. I have a soft voice and I don't carry a big stick. So, okay, so with this example, we have Acer rubrum, and the common name that we usually use around here is a red maple. So then to go a step further, we have cultivars, and we have a lot of cultivars that we use in our cucurbits, in our vegetables, all these things. And usually we are using cultivars. Varieties are also, a lot of times we use these names interchangeably. But there is a difference, you know, varieties are naturally occurring and they're true to type, which means the seed comes back and it looks the same as its parent. Cultivars are cultivated by people. They're what our plant breeders are doing to create a certain characteristic in a plant. So in this example here, we have Acer rubrum Armstrong. That defines that specific cultivar, okay? Any questions so far? All right, so another characteristic of cucurbits is the way that the flowers are arranged on the plant. So cucurbits many times have different staminate flowers and pistillate flowers, and they do have some perfect flowers too, but this is just how the male and female reproductive organs are on the plant. This is often arranged, they're monoecious, which means these flowers are often on the same plant. So you'll have male flowers and female flowers on that same plant. So because of this, cucurbits rely a lot on insect pollination. Now that doesn't, what is that use? What's the number one that we think of with cucurbits? Bees, right? But it doesn't have to be bees. Some cucurbits actually bloom at night and their flowers, that flower syndrome attracts moths. So it is a little bit different, but depending on what it is, but bees are a big pollinator for cucurbits overall. So these are some of the things to think about as we go through it. So, like I said, Cucurbitaceae, that's the family. And there's a lot of genus within it. And these are just some that I picked out. So these are some that we know, that are familiar to us. So we have like Citrulus, which is our watermelon, Cucumis, which is our cucumbers and some of our melons. Lagenaria, these are some of our gourds. We also have Cucurbita, these are some of our summer squashes, zucchini or courgettes, pumpkins. But again, look at the botanical names, because a lot of times, if we just say the gourd family or the gourds, that's a very broad and general term, because you can have different species within gourds. You can have different species within pumpkins. And that kind of blows your mind when you start looking at this and thinking about the way you might have talked about gourds or pumpkins or squash before. So let's dive into like a few of these that we know very well. So cucumber. Cucumber is pretty much all in that one species, Cucumis sativus. But then amongst that, you have different types of cucumbers. You have slicers and you have picklers, right? But then you have American cucumbers. So American cucumbers are, so what's the difference between this one and this one? English? It's darker, right? So that's this. So this one's an American cucumber. Why is this one? Why is this one packaged different?
And skin.
It's thin skin. So this is more like an English or beta alpha. Okay, and these are thinner skinned cucumbers. And they dehydrate. So in the grocery store, you'll find these packaged in these cellophane wraps. You'll also find things like the cocktail cucumbers. These are thinner skinned cucumbers. The Asian, that's sort of this type right here in the beta alpha. Again, a lot of times like the beta alpha, the Asian, even some of the cocktails, these are grown in greenhouses in protected culture. The thin skins, they can get damaged very easily. These are also in cucumbers. The flowers can be, you can have monoecious, and you have the male and the female flowers. on that same plant. That's most of our garden cucumbers. They produce for a long time. These are the cucumbers that you plant and they just keep going. And you can produce a lot of cucumbers over a pretty good amount of time. Then you have gynoecious cucumbers. So these are cucumbers that produce mostly almost all female flowers on the plant. But these cucumbers, they put on a lot of female flowers at one time. They produce a pretty good amount of fruit, and then they're kind of done. So they produce a lot of fruit, but it's in a shorter amount of time. The other thing about those is you gotta have male flowers because they still have to be pollinated. So a lot of times what growers will do if they have those varieties is they'll have about 15% of those plants that are monoecious and have male flowers, and they'll plant those within that planting, and that gives them a pollinator, that pollinizer. But then sometimes you can have gynoecious and what's called parthenocarpic. And parthenocarpic cucumbers can set fruit without pollination. So you can have parthenocarpic by itself. You can have the combination of gynoecious and parthenocarpic, or you can have just monoecious plants. Like I said, a lot of times the seed for the gynoecious and parthenocarpic together, that's pretty expensive seed. So if you go to buy it, you'll know that you're buying it because it's fairly pricey. That's also grown in greenhouses most of the time because they're trying, in those cases, when you got parthenocarpic fruit, they're trying to exclude the pollinators because they don't want them on there. If they get on there, then what they can do, it causes those plants to, those fruit to have seeds, and they don't want that. Parthenocarpic varieties are also used a lot for like winter production, early season production, because you don't have those pollinators available. So that's a good choice for growers. But in the garden, most of the time you're going to have monoecious plants or some variety that's well suited for a garden. So you can grow them, you know, just when you grow your cucumbers, you can grow them right on the ground, just like that, but you get splash from soil. You also get sort of these blemishes. Again, in the garden, you know, the blemishes, the off color, maybe not such a big deal. Gets a little bit more of a bigger deal when you're trying to sell something to someone and you want it to look very nice. So the other option is putting them on a trellis. Cucumbers trellis really nicely. It's worth the time to me to go on and do that. These fruit, they grow much straighter. They grow without any blemish. Then you got nice, beautiful cucumbers. You also don't have that that soil contact, and a lot of times that can lead to fruit rots. It can lead to disease, that sort of thing. So trellising your cucumbers is a good practice. And for options, you got all kinds of options. So you can use like cattle panels. So this is cattle panel here that you can buy at Tractor Supply or something. You buy some T-posts, you can put that on there and let them run. This is just a little trellis that I did at my house. This is not cucumbers, that's actually loofahs on that, but I just took some electrical conduit EMT and bent it over in a tube, made a series of them, and I let the loofahs just grow all over them. They hang down through it, it's pretty. But you can also take the T-post and the cattle panel and sit it on its side, or you can have trellis lines like this, and you can do, so cucumbers, you can actually prune them, and you can cause them to just grow in one single leader right up. This could be a good option if you have limited space and you want to really try and fit some cucumbers in a tight spot, or if you want to give them room and just not have them grow all over each other. That can actually help a lot with diseases. Okay, so gourds. Gourds is a very broad term because we can have different species within the gourd family. So within gourds, you can have Cucurbits Those are just sort of those ornamental gourds that look all funky in the fall that you can get. So these are a yellow flower, big yellow flower, look kind of like a pumpkin or a squash. You can also have Laganaria. These are those utilitarian gourds. These are the ones with white flowers, and they have a moth pollinator. And there's all kinds, there's bottle gourds. I have some here. This is type of bottle gourd. This is the bushel gourd here. All kinds of these gourds. And in fact, if you grow a really good one, you can take it to the state fair because they have a contest. But the bushel gourds. So there's some bushel gourds growing in a bed. And that's probably where some of these came from. This is just something that I had out in my place.
Is there soil underneath that?
So
Which
there's
is-
actually a sweet gum log kind
Okay.
of going through the middle of
Oh.
that. And once they rot down a little bit, you can cover it with soil and compost and then a layer of mulch. And I don't water those gourds at all through the summer. And they produce quite a lot. But again, these bushel gourds, these are more, they have the white flowers, but they also have a very velvety leaf. Really big leaves. If you ever come up and you don't know what the gourd, there's a cucurbit growing, if it's got that velvety leaf to it, and it's not that prickly type leaf, it's probably, one of these type gourds, these you got. You can actually get these to grow like, this. But what you gotta do is you gotta go in and you gotta thin your fruit to about 1 fruit per plant, 1 or 2 fruit per plant. So I just let them go and I get like 100, 200 of those, these size ones. But these are giveaways. So if y'all want any, there's seeds in here. I bet they'll germinate. And if you want one, let me know and you can take it. So again, let's go back, and then the last is the luther gourd. Has anybody grown luthers? Yeah, so luthers are a lot of fun. They're a different genus than the other two. But they got this, I'm sure everybody's seen a luther somewhere or another. You just let them dry. With all the gourds, you're not picking them immaturely. You're letting them get all the way to maturity. And then these guys will just dry on the vine. You go through, you pick them once or twice, and you've got all your loofahs. Then you can take them and process them. They have sort of this tough skin on them, but if you just dip them in a little bit of warm water, that just tears right off. You can then take the sponge and you can put it in a light Clorox bleach solution, and that gets all the staining off, things like that. And then you can use them for whatever. I use them to clean, the bathtub, use them in the shower, all kinds of stuff for them. So then close to that, and in that same, some of these are in the same genus, is squash. So you can have summer squash, which is Cucurbit pepo. This is yellow. You can have crookneck, straight neck, zucchini, patty pan, acorn squash. So this and this are the same species, which is kind of blows my mind, right? And has anyone ever said, don't plant like a pumpkin next to a squash, because they'll cross pollinate and have some weird hybrid type thing, right? Has anybody ever heard that? I hear that a lot. Sometimes people come to me and say that. And in a way, that's true. It could be true if they were the same species. But if they're not the same species, they won't really cross-pollinate. Now, even if they did cross-pollinate and they're the same species, if these two cross-pollinated, you wouldn't see it in the fruit the first year. You would see it if you saved the seed plant second. But if anybody ever say, I hear that all the time, and if anybody says that, you can say, well, maybe they can, if they're the same species. But if you see, species within these cucurbits can look vastly different, but they're the same species. So summer squash, they have a bush type growth habit. So cucurbits can have this really long vine growth habit, or they'll have more of a compact bush. With your summer squash, that's that bush type growth habit. So with these, you're harvesting the immature fruit, you're harvesting pretty frequently. So once they start producing, you really need to go back every other day and check your plants, unless you want these like whoppers that aren't very palatable. So again, like depending on the variety and depending on what it is, but like your zucchini, a lot of times you're harvesting zucchini at the 6-inch to 8-inch range. Once it starts to get bigger than that, it gets to be a little seedy, a little tougher. These are thinner skins, so they don't keep as long. They'll keep for about a week or so in the fridge. So you just have a little bit of limited storage. Again, with the summer squash, what characterizes that is that you're harvesting that immature fruit, and you're eating that fresh. So then you can have winter squash. And again, if you see some of these botanical names that are repeated. And these are the same species as your yellow summer squash. So delicata, has anybody have this squash? Yeah, pretty good. I like to roast it. It's kind of a pumpkin-y type texture. Spaghetti squash, those are both same species as your yellow squash. Then you have Cucurbit moscata, that's your butternut. That's more of a very viney fruit. So you're harvesting these at a more mature stage. So you're waiting. So that means a longer wait from the time you plant to the time you harvest. You have that longer wait time before you're harvesting. They also have a much longer storage time. So some of these squash can store for months. So if you plant them, you get a good crop, and you cure them, you can really store them all winter and eat them. So if you have the space, these are more viney, so they do take up more space. But if you have the space, these can be a really great option to kind of get that harvest in the fall, late summer, and then eat on that all through the winter. And then pumpkins. So, I put pumpkins in here. What defines a pumpkin? Why do we call it pumpkin? It's really because that's the same species as the summer squash, the yellow squash. It's the same species as that delicata squash. So what defines a pumpkin? And it's kind of just how we use it. Pumpkins are generally rounder, larger. So we call them pumpkins. But in reality, they're the same species as the squash, they're the same species as the summer squash, the winter squash, things like that. Again, that's the same species. Right there's your butternut squash. And then Cucurbit maxima, that's some of your giant pumpkins. Those are some of those. This one here, I can't recall the name of this one. So like I said, a lot of variety, but even within pumpkins, what you think are pumpkins are not all the same. So I think that that's one of the neatest things about cucurbits is we think of pumpkins, we think of squash, we think of, some of these other things, but it's a lot of overlap. So you can't really say pumpkins and squash and lump. It's more appropriate to lump botanically, lump that pumpkin to some of those squash than it is to lump them in with these guys. Now, from a practical standpoint, yeah, these are all pumpkins. But
Erin, can you go back to the one that has the different types? Yeah, that one, I just need to take a picture.
yeah, sure.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right, so, and then last, watermelon. Oh, I think I have melon, a little bit on melon over here. But, watermelon, you have all kinds. You usually have reds, pinks, and yellows for your colors. Your fruit weight, it can be variable depending on the variety. It can go from 6 to 60 pounds. Biggest question I get is when to pick your watermelon. So when the underside of the fruit turns from like a greenish white to this more tan or yellowish color, that's a good indication. The other thing you can look at is the tendril that comes out near the melon. And all cucurbits are gonna have tendrils, and they're like modified leaves, right? So they're these things that come out and grab. But on the watermelon, you can look at the tendril that's closest to the fruit. When it starts to dry up, that's a good indication that it's very close to being ripe. Some varieties, the tendril dries up before it's completely ripe. So the tendril by itself is not a great indication. So use that tendril drying up with the color of the underside of the fruit together, and that'll give you more of an indication when it's ready. They also, if you tap on them, they have a little bit denser sound to them, but I can go out with somebody and we'll be tapping them and, it's like, oh, it sounds solid to me. It sounds solid to me, so, but those are some indicators that I would use when to harvest your watermelon. Over here, I pulled this from the Master Gardener toolbox. This is the Master Gardener toolbox is really a great resource if you're just wanting to learn some general information about a plant. That's a great place to go. And for some of these edible plants, they even have cultivars that are pretty common for our area. So Crimson Sweet, Sugar Babies, I really like Sugar Babies. They produce a lot of fruit. If you want a lot of, smaller watermelons, they produce quite a few. And then melons, just to kind of, go over, there's a lot of different types of melons out there. So we don't even have time to go over, just even gloss over everyone. But overall, cantaloupe, honeydews, those are two big ones that we grow here. So for cantaloupe, deciding when to pick that. So cantaloupes will actually do what is called slipping from the vine. And that is what this picture's of. So a full slip is when that stem releases from the vine and it just easily comes off. That's called a full slip. And that's when they're ready. Now, cantaloupes have been bred over the years to ripen a little bit if you pick them a little bit early. So what you can do is you can pick most of your cantaloupes just a little bit before full slip, and you can put those on your counter to ripen. So things like honeydews, melons like honeydews though, they won't slip from the vine. So you have to use other indicators for honeydews on when it's ready. A lot of times with honeydews, you're looking at rind color. You're also smelling it. It'll get a much sweeter smell when it's ready to pick. Some melons, you have to look at that tendril that's close to the melon. So whatever you choose, there's all kinds of Galen melons. There's all kinds of melons out there that would be great in the garden. A lot of fun to grow. Just look up, what that indicator is for harvest. There's a lot of good information out there for most of these melons and varieties that can tell you. One that I would say maybe would set you up for disappointment is Sharon Tate melons. I have tried to grow them outside. I've tried to grow them in tunnels. I've tried to, they just pop, they split. So They're really hard to grow. They're really tasty melons. They're really, flavorful, very aromatic, but they're just always been hard for me to grow. So be warned, if you want to try Sharon Tate's, they're really good, but they're a little bit of a challenge in our climate. Canary melons, they're really nice. They're really fun to grow. Yellow, you can pick them just a little bit early and they're a little bit more crisp, but the longer you leave them, the sweeter they'll get. Let's see, for cantaloupe, a pretty standard for us is Athena. For another like personalized cantaloupe, if you want to try one, would be called sugar cube. That's really good. You got a question, Chief?
Yeah, I did have a question. If you're planning on trellising some of these, do you have to worry about those that are full slip self-picking?
Repeat,
Yeah.
repeat the
Uh,
question.
So the question is, if you're planning on trellising melons, do you have to worry about some of the melons self-picking or slipping from the vine and falling to the ground? And you do. If you're gonna trellis them up, you need to think about something to hold that weight. And that could be, you can take a piece of cloth and kind of make a hammock for your melon. I've taken, onion bags before, and you can tie that onion bag up and put the melon in that, and that'll kind of hold it up.
Hose?
What's that? Pantyhose, yeah, you can use pantyhose. Let's see. But something like sugar cube, that's gonna make a lot of small melons, a pretty good amount. Something like Athena's gonna make just a few melons, bigger though. So, think about who you're feeding. Think about, do you want to just split one and put ice cream in it or whatever? Or do you want to, have something for the family, with some larger melons? But again, melons can be very variable, with when they're ripe, when to know when to pick it. So just keep that in mind, look that up. Okay, so for growing melons, growing cucurbits, site selection is going to be one of your biggest ways to set yourself up for success. So overall, you want a well-drained soil. They do like some organic matter in that soil. You want 8 to 10 hours of sunlight, and you want good airflow. Those are sort of the main boxes to check when you're looking at your site. Also, how you irrigate is gonna be very important. So water slow from the bottom. So if you can, don't use overhead irrigation. And what that does is it puts water all over your plants, it keeps them wet, and that encourages disease. So you want to water about 6 to 8 inches deep. Don't keep the soil saturated. So that means you gotta go out and you gotta check. Especially if you have a heavier soil, like clay, make sure you're going out and you're checking that soil to make sure you're not overwatering. Also, mulch can be really good. It's gonna not only suppress weeds, but it's gonna even out that moisture. So if it's a sandy soil, it'll help it drying out especially. Mulches, you can use hardwood mulch. Now they even make these woven mulches that have the holes already cut in them. These are really nice you can reuse these for years as long as you treat them right and you take them up off of the ground, fold them up, store them somewhere nice, and these will last a long time. If you use mulch about 2 to 3 inches, don't go much over that. You start to affect oxygen exchange between the soil and the atmosphere. And you start to, it could start to rob a little bit of nitrogen from your soil to break down that carbon, that woody material. So, and I'm also gonna say for fertility, for your nutrients, get a soil test. There, you can get one here, you can send it off. It's free right now. It'll be free until Thanksgiving, or ish. And that's gonna tell you what your pH is. It's gonna tell you sort of those chemical properties in your soil. You know, what nutrients do you have? It'll give you a recommendation for a lot of those nutrients. It'll tell you if you need to adjust your pH. All of those things are very important. And this law, Liebig's law of the minimum, no matter what crop you're growing, this concept is what I would always use to think about how to get the best yield that I can. So this illustration down here kind of shows it's a visual for this law. So this is this barrel, which each one of the staves, these wooden staves. Imagine that is a nutrient, nitrogen, and the one beside it is potassium. One side is phosphorus, and all these nutrients that the plants need. And then some of these others are other things like maybe one in the back is sunlight. The next one's soils. And this law states that yield is not going to be determined by what the highest ones are. It's going to be determined by what the limiting ones are. So you can have great 8 to 10 hour sunlight, just what you need to get that highest yield. You can have the perfect soil, but if your potassium is low, that's going to limit the yield that you're going to get. So that's sort of the way that you need to think about it, not I'll go excess with these to make up for this, because that limiting factor is going to do that. So with that, I grew some cucumbers, and I wanted to grow them a little bit earlier so that I could show you some other things. But let's look at these. All right, so these were planted in mid-February. Okay. So does anybody see a big difference between these? Is there any difference between these? Huh? A little bit darker, right? What's that? I'm not being very fair, Amber. No, actually, this is just variety. These are two different varieties, two different cultivars. This one's called Mini Me, this one's Market One. This is the way that they're supposed to look. So the color is the way that they're supposed to look. One's just a little darker than the other, right? So now, here's another Mini Me. This one and this one were planted at the same time. Okay? They were basically sitting beside each other. The difference is this one got adequate fertilizer. This one got very minimal fertilizer. It got basically the fertilizer that was in the potting soil, that was loaded into the potting soil. This one got extra fertilizer. So everything else being equal, you see the difference here. And that would continue on. Your yield is much higher than this one. Here, this is another Market One. Huge difference here, right? Now, these were a couple plants down from each other. But this one, I put extra shade on. So this one got all of the sunlight that it could get, while this one was growing in the shade. They got the same amount of fertilizer, right? Same seed in the same pack. So that shows you that, you know, even with adequate fertilizer, even with all these things, if you take away one of those things that grow to give you that highest yield, your plants are gonna suffer and you're gonna get a little yield. So anytime you're looking at your garden spot, or you're thinking about your fertility, or you're thinking about all these things, think about, well, what is that minimum? Because there's no perfect scenario, right? So as gardeners, we're looking at it and saying, okay, well, this spot, my garden spot, it gets 6 hours of sun. What if your garden spot gets 2 hours of sun? Is cucumber a great crop for you to grow there? No. Because then you're gonna get plants like this, and you might get some fruit, but it's never gonna come out the way you want it to. All right, so looking at all those different pieces of the barrel, and what's that minimum, and how is that gonna affect you? Is it acceptable? Because if it's not acceptable within that acceptable limit, you gotta just be able to manage what your expectation is for your crop. So with germination, you know, let's go to like planting, setting yourself up for success. Let's say right now in April, we're probably getting past frost, right? We're really close. I don't see a whole lot of frost in the upcoming forecast, maybe a light one. These guys, none of your cucurbits like frost, by the way. So you're always gonna wanna plant any cucurbit after your threat of frost is passed. So with seed, if you're going with seed, you wanna get good germination. So germination is the proper temperature, soil temperature. You need moisture, you need air, you need the correct light conditions sometimes, and then you get germination, you get good germination. So if you're outside of any of those limits, you're not gonna get those germination rates that you may be expecting. So how are you gonna find that out? Well, if you're buying from a lot of our seed companies today are gonna give that information to you. They're gonna tell you what those optimal conditions are. You know, here's one for pole beans. It's telling you what it needs to grow very well, but it also, I don't know if this one tells you. I don't see this one with the exact, germination. This is actually one from Johnny's. That tells you the optimum temperature range. And once you start getting outside of that, you're gonna have lower germination rates. This one's for pumpkin right here. You can see the optimum's about 87 degrees. Our soil temperatures right now are nowhere close to that. You know, ours are maybe up in the lower 60s right now, maybe. But again, when you buy whatever you're going to plant, think about what that optimum range is. Also, make sure that you're keeping your soils well drained. Don't oversaturate. The seed will rot if you keep it oversaturated. So you gotta think about what your soil type is. You gotta think about how that water is gonna move out of that soil. If it's a clay soil or a heavier soil and you water real good and then the sun comes out and bakes it and puts the crust over that soil, that's gonna make it really hard for that seed to come up. That's where it's a little bit of mulch, something over that soil to keep it nice and soft will help out a lot. Now, for this time of year, if you're planting squash or cucumbers, to me, a much better option is a transplant. So transplants are not only gonna, you know, you already have a plant that's growing, but think about a transplant. How long did it take to get that transplant? For like a cucumber or a squash, especially cucumbers, you may be getting a month ahead of someone who's putting a seed in the ground. With squash, you're probably still getting 3 weeks, you know, at least. That's gonna get you ahead to get your fruit faster, but a lot of times, a lot of our diseases and our pests, you can beat them to when they're coming out, and when they're really, those pressures are really starting to build. So, having a good transplant is a really handy thing in the spring. So if you're going to buy transplants, you wanna buy good ones. So you're gonna inspect them. You want nice white roots. You want a good color to it. You don't want it to be yellow and looking stressed. You wanna check it for insects and disease. You wanna make sure that it's not already riddled with, aphids or something like that, so you don't wanna take that home with you. You want them to have, pretty sturdy stems. You don't want them to have flowers or fruit already. That's an indication that it's probably been sitting in that tray for too long, if it already is going into reproductive growth. A lot of times, so you need to make sure they're hardened for the field. If you took a transplant directly out of the greenhouse and you took it out to the field, in the greenhouse, they're being babies. It's a very ideal environment for them. And when you take them out, you put them straight into the field, you shock them. And they're not used to that, so they'll probably either get severely hit and slow their growth, or they'll die. So make sure that if you take it home, you can kind of gradually put it outside, put it in a nice place where it's not gonna get beat down by the sun, and gradually, move it out, unless the nursery said, oh yeah, they've been out here, they've been getting all the outdoor conditions that they'll get in the field. So then you can move it out. Let's see. Oh, with transplants, with a lot of your cucurbits, they don't really like the roots being bothered, so you can just take them straight out and plant that. You don't have to tease the roots out on a lot of your cucurbits.
How long do you recommend on the hardening? Is that like a week or two?
A few days, yeah, probably about a week, if it's been in that greenhouse, you wanna move it out. You just want to make sure that it's not wilting down and getting too stressed. If you can put it out and it looks just as good hours later, and the next day it looks good, and, you can move it on out. No big deal. Okay, so insects. Insects do like cucurbits. So for insects, this is a nice handy chart. This is on a NC State publication. And I'll work with the master gardener to send some resources out to you. But this is a chart that's nice to use. It just shows some of your common insects that you're gonna see on cucurbits. And then it shows you whether they're common or sporadic. And then it gives you a couple of notes down there too. But aphids, good chance you might see some aphids on them. And how you handle your insects really depends on how many plants you have and how what's acceptable to you. If I have five cucumbers and they're growing and I go and scout, I flip over and there's a lot of aphids on one leaf, but I don't see them on the other ones, I might just cut that leaf off in the trash and I'll go on my business. I'm not gonna go try and, get a insecticide and spray and do all that. I'm just gonna remove it. Cause that's the easiest thing to do. And in reality, most of our insects, squash bugs, cucumber beetles, aphids, in a garden situation, if you don't have too much, get a bucket of soapy water. When you go out to your garden, you're working, you got it. When you scout, if I were to come out and scout, this guy, I'm looking at it, and, this guy does have some marks on it, and I know that those are thrips, because I know what it looks like, but, you're looking for any blemish on here, and if you see a blemish, like what is it? Is it pretty uniform across it? I'm just flipping, and I'm looking, you know, and I can go down through the plants. If there's cucumber beetles and I think they're out, they like to hide up here in the growing tips. So I'll just sort of grab the growing tip and tease the leaves a little bit. And a lot of times if there's a cucumber beetle in there, they come crawling out. You can see them. That's another reason why I like single leader cucumbers is because there's only one growing tip. So I can roll down through there really fast and do that. But you're just going down through there and you're looking really quick. And the more you do it, the more your eyes are trained to what you're looking for, and you'll be able to find those pests really easily. The key is early detection. If you can get ahead of them, you can control them. If you come out and you got an infestation, that's a much harder road to go down to get rid of those pests. So if we look at some of these specifically, so pickle worms, these are one. They can be a pain, especially on some of your squash, cucumbers. They can get in your cucumbers. They're a late season pest, so they really don't show up for us until around August. So you really don't have to look for them until then. You're gonna look, this right here is called frass. You know, this is frass, kind of caterpillar droppings. Kind of nasty looking. If you found a cucumber or a squash like this, you're just gonna cut it off, you're gonna destroy that, you're gonna send it to the trash. Or take it somewhere that's far away. You could even drop it in a bucket of water if you wanted to kill the larva first. And then, compost it, whatever. You can also exclude the moths. And the reason why you can exclude this particular pest is because the adult is a moth that flies at night. So if you want, you can get something, something like this. This is actually a row cover that, this is called agrabah. It's like a woven material. And a lot of farmers use this for frost protection. So you might see strawberry fields when it gets around freezing this time of year, they'll put this on there. But this comes in different weights. And the weight is by square yard. So this is a 1.5 ounce. So this is considered sort of a medium weight. So this provides a certain amount of protection for frost, but this also lets sunlight through. So really heavy ones are like a 2.5 ounce, something like that. That doesn't let a lot of light through, but it gives a lot of protection. But they have this that's really light, that's like a 0.5 ounce, and that's considered more of an insect barrier. Because it doesn't give a lot of cold protection, doesn't give a lot of frost protection, but it does let a lot of light through, and it restricts those insects from getting to the plant. So you can, if you want to, and it's worth your time, you can go out in the evenings. These guys are most active around sunset to around midnight. Yes, this is called agrabah.
Spell that for me. Any people will be able to recognize it because I won't be able
Let's see, agribon.
Thank you.
I believe.
That's-
It gets close enough.
Yeah, floating row cover is another common name for it.
Yeah. We actually have, we have a company, a seed and feed company that delivers to the ag center. We're a delivery site and they sell it. So, we can get you some of that information. And again, so summer squash is actually a preferred crop for it. So in certain situations, you can use summer squash as your trap crop. If you have like cucumbers or you have another cucurbit that you don't want them going to, but you're not really interested in the summer squash, or if it gets in the summer squash, you don't care, then you can plant summer squash, deal with the fruit that gets infested, and if you got some that's not, that's like cream on top, you can give that to your neighbors, whatever. But it can be used as a trap crop. Cucumber beetles, so these guys are, you probably see cucumber beetles in the garden, especially, I mean, hey, if they're named after the crop, they probably like it. So, you have spotted cucumber beetles, you also have them that are striped, these are striped cucumber beetles. They chew, they have these chewing mouth parts, and the cucumber beetles are bad, they really scar up the fruit, they can scar up the flowers and the leaves, but they also are vectors. They, in their saliva, they carry a bacteria. And that bacteria, when it gets in some of these cucurbits, causes a bacterial wilt. The bacteria gets in the plant and then it kind of gums up in the vascular system, and then the plant can't transpire, it can't move liquids through it anymore. So it just wilts and dies. This is a melon plant that has bacterial wilt from cucumber beetle feed. So if you have bacterial wilt, your problem is a cucumber beetle problem. So squash bugs, so in comparison to the chewing mouth parts that the beetles have, they have piercing mouth parts. So they're gonna pierce the leaf, pierce the fruit. They cause these really unsightly yellow blotches on the fruit a lot of times. On other crops too, not just cucurbits, but also like tomatoes, they'll cause these yellow blotches on them. Hand picking them, you're gonna wanna go, if you can catch them early, they're probably gonna catch up with you, but you can probably keep them away for long enough. This is their eggs, so you're gonna wanna scrape those eggs off too. So the things that you can do, you can take a piece of, like a square of plywood or something, put it down in your garden near your plants. They really like to get under that sort of stuff. So you can kind of trick them, give them a little hotel to go into, and then come out in the morning and squish them, put them in soapy water or whatever. You can also try trap cropping with them. Hubbard squash it's actually been researched. They love Hubbard squash. So they will go over to it, and they much prefer it to a lot of other cucurbits. If you do plant the Hubbard squash, they take up a lot of room, so you need a pretty big garden. Or you need somewhere close enough to the garden that the Hubbard squash can just run. You don't want to plant it more than 100, 150 feet away. The further you start to get with that trap crop, the more your population is going to go up in your garden. Ideal is about 6 to 10 feet of separation between that Hubbard and your crop. You can take the vines of the Hubbard and kind of throw it over into that row, so it's out of your way. But again, they'll grow sort of towards it. And you can use the Hubbard if they don't destroy it. You can, again, use the Hubbard squash. So squash vine borers. So these guys, this is a moth also. It comes and it lays eggs near the base of the stem. The larvae bore into that and they start feeding, and they just destroy that material, and the plant just wilts and it starts to die. So you'll come out and your plants will look great one day, next day they'll just be collapsed. This one's harder to exclude because the moths fly during the day. They don't fly at night like the pickleworms. So for these guys, again, they are going to have that sawdust like frass though at the base of that stem, and you'll see a small hole there. You can, if you just have a few, you can wrap the lower stem with aluminum foil. You can it only needs to be a couple of inches up on the stem, but you can do that, and then the larva can't get in there. You can plant less preferred squash, crooknecks, butternut, Kershaw. Those are all squashes that they don't really prefer. And then you can use a trap crop again, Hubbard squash, they do prefer that. to other cucurbits, so you can use that one again. Also, you might want to cultivate the soil at the end of the season if you have them, because the larvae pupate in the soil for the next season. So if you cultivate there, you can destroy those pupa in the soil. The only thing is, if you do cultivate it, put down a cover crop or something to keep the soil covered, just for your soil health. So that's sort of some of the big insects that you're gonna see. Certainly not the only insects that you could see. If you see something that you don't know, as always with any disease or insect, get it positively identified. So, Debbie can help you with that. We have a pest, disease, and insect clinic. They do really great with pictures, and that's free if you send pictures. So all you gotta do, you can make your account real quick, and then you can send those pictures, and those guys are like, they're quick. They're really good at identifying things. So for disease, in general, you're gonna have a lot of fungal diseases in cucurbits. And to prevent a lot of your disease, what you can do is have healthy plants. So that means you're gonna have a good garden site, you're gonna give it the nutrition that it needs, the water that it needs, all those things. Prevent saturated soils for extended periods of time, because you can get different types of rots and disease that come in that are soil borne. And once you get those in, that's a longer time than some of your other diseases to rotate out of. So make sure that your soils are well drained. Even if they're not super well drained, when you have the garden site, build that up into a mound, and that'll help facilitate that drain. Good airflow, that's a big one. You want nice airflow coming down through your garden to help dry those leaves out. Again, keep the foliage dry. We talked about that with irrigation. You want to water from the bottom if at all possible. If you can't water it from the bottom, then water fairly early in the morning to where there's enough time for that foliage to dry. You want the foliage to dry before the sun goes down. Because you don't want that prolonged moisture. And you can find resistant and tolerant plants. So for a lot of diseases, there's a lot of cultivars that plant breeders have used that are resistant or tolerant to some of these diseases. So, cucurbit downy mildew, we'll go through just a few of them that are major diseases. So cucurbit downy mildew, this one blows up from the south, it comes up from Florida. We actually have a forecast system for farms, and you can sign up for it. It'll show you when we have outbreaks. But it's a pretty devastating disease for some cucurbits. Favorable environmental conditions or high humidity, moisture, 6 to 12 hours of moisture are ideal. That's why I was saying watering time is very critical. You can plant early to try and get in there before it blows up here. You want to keep your leaves dry, and you want to plant tolerant varieties. So really for this one, at the homeowner level, fungicides, there's not a lot of fungicides that are going to knock this out today. So really these practices are going to be your best bet at trying to keep that away. So powdery mildew, again, fungus, favorable environmental conditions are moderate temperatures, 68 to 80, medium to high humidity, 50 to 90. That's like every day here. Somewhere in that range, right? So infection can occur in dry weather. So you can get infection even if you don't have those super moist environments. Resistant cultivars, adequate plant spacing is good, really good practice for this disease. Good garden sanitation. Don't have a lot of weeds in the garden. Downy mildew or powdery mildew can can infect some of your weeds and then just hop right over to your crop. So just keeping that clean, keep your garden clean. And if you need to use, there are some fungicides that you can use for downy, if you really need it. Chlorothalonil, which is, like a Dacamil product.
For powdery mildew, you said
I
down.
keep on
You
saying
said
downy
powdery.
mildew, sorry, powdery mildew. Downy mildew, there's not a lot for downy mildew. All right, and then the last thing that I want to go over, yes.
Is it, can you put it on after the fact, or is it, you have to put it on before?
Yeah, so for your fungicide, you're really gonna wanna put that on before. Once you have it, you're not gonna cure that you have. Now, if you have some that you don't have, that don't have it, but you see it pop up, cut some of that that's been affected out, move it. And then you might wanna start your spray program to try and prevent more. So the last thing I wanna go over is blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is not a biotic thing. It's not a fungus or a virus or a bacteria. It is, it's a abiotic condition where calcium is not getting to the fruit. So for calcium in the plant, it has to be actively moved with the vascular system of the plant. So the plant needs to be moving water through it. So a lot of times when you're getting blossom end rot, it's because you're not having consistent water. It's because you may be watering and then you let it dry out too long. And water's not moving through that plant, calcium isn't going to the fruit, and then you start to see these, you might start to see when the fruit's small, sort of these very shaded areas on the bottom of the fruit. And then as that progresses, it will get darker and it will get larger until that whole fruit is basically done. You're not gonna get anything marketable out of that.
Is that the same thing as like when you get a cucumber and it starts growing and then the little tip thins out?
No, that's not, what that is poor pollination.
Oh,
Say for the folks online what she just said.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, when you see a cucumber that starts out looking normal and then it tapers down to nothing, that issue is poor pollination. That is not, an issue, with blossom end rot, but blossom end rot affects, this is watermelon. You can see blossom end rot on zucchini a lot of times, you'll see it. You see it on other crops, you see it on tomatoes, you see it on bell peppers. So it's a common thing to see, but this is why you want a soil test, because you want to make sure that you have enough calcium in your soil. But you also want to make sure that you're watering, your irrigation schedule is good enough to keep calcium flowing to those fruit when they're developing. So again, these are just a few. I have a whole book, like this thick, of diseases that cucurbits get. And when somebody tells me I got an outbreak of something, I don't know what it is, I take that book out with me. So like we could, there's so many things that these things can get. The biggest thing, again, just like with the insects, get a positive ID on it. So give me a call, give Debbie a call, we can help you diagnose that. And then you'll know either how you need to go forward within your season, but also what you need to do for the next season. Because a lot of times that affects that. Yes.
What was the name of that book again?
So the book that I use, we have what are called crop compendiums. And mine's a compendium of cucurbit diseases. And all crops have one. They're kind of pricey, it's a couple $100 for one. But I have one for brassicas, I got one for strawberries, tomatoes, right?
I have one for tomatoes. I keep on my desk in the summertime because that's the question I get.
Yeah.
Tomatoes.
You know, if we have a disease or, especially a disease issue, that's like what agents pick up and take to the field. And like, some stuff we really know, but some stuff. Okay, so for that, that's really all I have. But I'd be happy to talk gardening with you or answer any questions. Yes.
There is a question from, a vertical person asking about, asking if squash and cucumbers can be grown successfully in containers.
Yeah, they can. One thing, so the question was, can squash and cucumbers be grown successfully in containers? And they can. When you select something for a container though, I mean, make sure it's a big enough container, think about how big the plant's gonna get. So one, choose your plant. You might want to choose something that's a little bit smaller, like a patio cucumber.
Is your mini-me or whatever you call it? a
So,
small-
My mini-me isn't, it's actually a greenhouse, it's like a snacking cucumber.
Okay, so it's a smaller cucumber.
Yeah,
So-
my goal was to get these started earlier and show you some differences, because this is a monoecious, this is a dioecious, parthenocarpic, and I was gonna do some stuff with pollination in the greenhouse to show you, but I was late. But you can grow them in containers, but one thing to remember, when you're growing in containers dry out a lot faster. Especially when your root system fills up the entire thing. So get a nice big container that it can grow in and that root system has a lot of room to grow. Make sure that you're giving it adequate nutrition. You're probably gonna have to give it some liquid feeds. Because it's just not gonna have the real estate of the soil to reach out and find that nutrient.
What kind of ground prep would you do for an area that's never been gardened before and you wanted to use the landscape or the weed question?
Yeah, so,
So
okay.
repeat the question.
So the question was, how would you do the ground prep if you were going to use landscape fabric and do that? What you would want to do is you want to take your soil test. Once you got your soil test, you know what you got to add. You're going to add now, if you need a line, ideally you're putting your line down 6 to 9 months ahead of your crop. Because lime takes a good while to take effect. But your other nutrients, you're gonna do a pre-plant application of nutrient. You're gonna prepare your soil with, ideally, you can bust that soil up and get down a foot if you could. Now, if you can't, then go through, till, get as deep as you can. But you might want to then take that tilled soil and pull some of it in those rows to your plant bed. And, raise it up a little bit. Once you have it raised up, this is like a 4 foot, so you can put that down. And then you can either pin it, or you can put a little bit of soil on the shoulders. And then you can go down through your rows and you can either mulch, if they're wide enough, you could sow some grass, something like that, whatever's easiest for you to maintain. I wouldn't leave it just uncovered, because you're gonna get mud and just all kinds of splash, it's gonna get all over this. But, that's really the way that I would do it. I wouldn't try, no-till would be cool, but it's a hard thing to do with vegetables. Now, once you got your beds established, you can get a broad fork or something like that, and you can go through a broad fork. But again, it's a lot of work.
Good aerobic exercise.
Yeah, you won't have to go to the gym that night, I promise. All right, any other questions?
Any other questions online, Nancy?
You mentioned some disease resistant varieties for certain pests and disease, so I noticed in the catalogs, there's a lot of new varieties that sound really interesting to try. I'm not sure how well they would all do here. Do you have an experimental program where you test each year new varieties that might be of interest to, the home grower? Because I know if you go to like an old fashioned hardware store, they love to say the old varieties because that's what's growing and they work. But I'm intrigued by all the new ones. I just wonder who tests those for our area and see if they're any good.
Yeah,
So repeat the question.
so,
Just short it.
is there any program for disease resistant varieties for garden use? The answer to that is maybe kind of. I mean, there's nothing that I know of that is like a definitive, really robust program that's for home gardening. That says these are the cucumbers to plant. But some of our market gardeners use some varieties that would do really well in a garden situation. So what you might want to do is, if you go to a farmer's market and you got any friends that farm, something like that, just say, hey, what varieties do you plant out in your field? And how do you like it? Or, if you got gardening buddies and they're really serious in the gardening, some gardeners around here know some really good varieties. That's what I like to talk with farmers about. Hey, what varieties are you planting? Or, same way with gardening. If you got some really serious gardening friends, ask them, because if this is successful for them, it might be successful for you.
In the back, did you have a question?
Can we go back to the dreaded squash line door and
Sure.
hash that out for a little bit longer?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's what nightmares are made out of.
Oh, yeah, it looks pretty menacing.
Yeah, like I need products for how to prevent those stinkers.
Right,
The
so
aluminum foil didn't work.
what's that?
The aluminum foil didn't work.
The aluminum foil didn't work. Okay, so the question was how to prevent squash vine borers. So I didn't mention insecticides, and I didn't.
I have an answer.
Oh, There's some.
Plant different varieties. If you plant a fall squash, any squash that has a thick, hard stem, they cannot chew through it, and your squash will be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you said that earlier, didn't you?
Yeah, so you can plant some resistant, varieties. The other thing is trap crops. Plant some, what squash was it? What type?
It was zucchini and straight neck squash.
Okay,
Would the
So-
Hubbard squash work as a trap crop? Hubbard squash work as a
yeah,
trap
you
crop?
could definitely try Hubbard squash. The other thing is you can plant, spray insecticides just on that bottom portion. Probably like mid-May and then onward. You could do like a pyrethroid, like a pyrethrin, something like that. Again, but the reason why I haven't mentioned insecticides is because, bees really like cucurbits, and you gotta be very careful with insecticides if you're gonna use them. The good thing about using something like that on the stem though, is that you're not applying it anywhere close to where the flowers are. Those sorts of insecticides are contact. So the other thing you can do, you can try, is if you end up seeing one, it goes in, you can cut the stem and you can kill it. And you can take soil and put it up around the plant and water it real good and mulch it, and sometimes they'll recover. But that's kind of a long shot.
Yeah. Could you just cover the whole thing with the insect netting?
So ideally you could. The problem is the bees gotta get in there to pollinate. And this moth does not fly at night, it flies during the day when the bees are flying. So you can do it actually until first flower. you can cover them with just an exclusion, floating row cover. So it helped for a little while. But
Are these, is there a certain time in the season that these are more prevalent?
yeah, so they'll come in like about a month from now, about mid-May or so, and they'll just keep on going. So planting early, like try and get some transplants and put them in now. And then you'll probably get a good amount of squash before possibly one comes in and gets it, you know. The later you plant with cucurbits, the more problems you're gonna have. It's just the way it is.
You can plant now, being so cold.
You can try, I mean. If I had some transplants and they're like, you know, $3, I'd throw some out there. And you can, if you got row cover, throw some of it over it. You know, they'll actually grow really nice under here. The problem is if there's any insects under there, they grow really nice. They like it just as much as anything. But it would be worth a try for me if I really wanted to squash her.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Erin.
I don't want these. If anybody wants a cucumber, I'm sorry to put you online. I would give them a container.
We're signing off for you online. Have a good evening.